talk about school first, and then maybe we'll talk about like your music because you wanted to talk about
All
that,
right. Okay.
and then maybe we'll talk about the ladies a little bit.
Okay. Uh, where shall we start with high school? Well, I already mentioned we have to walk all the way to high school and back. This these days it seems ridiculous that somebody would have to walk a mile to school with everybody riding in school buses, but that was the way you got there, on your feet back in those days. And we didn't mind. But anyhow, our school was a great big brown stone building up at the top of the hill between Harrison and Main Street in Davenport. And it was a large school because it was the only school only high school in a town at that time of about 60,000. And so it was crowded. I mean, our enrollment numbered, somewhere, maybe as high as 2,000. That's difficult for me to know now, but there was a lot of kids there. And which gave us a good break from sport, well, in all kinds of interscholastic competitions, everything from debating to any of the sports and everything else, because with that great volume to choose from to get our participants, we had a big advantage over the other smaller schools. Like Rock Island, which was a much smaller town, had 2 high schools. So we had this great mass of humanity that we could pull from for our stars. So we won most of everything. Davenport was a hot shot, but it wasn't because we were better, it's just we had the better selection. But I enjoyed high school. I never studied. How I regret that now, because I just wouldn't crack a book. I wouldn't do any homework or anything else, and I'd try and slide by, and I got just passing grades until I came to Mr. Collins, a history teacher. He was a great teacher. He had come from a college. He had taught college kids. So as a result of that, he taught us at a higher level than we were used to. Those of us that come up through this way, and the teachers as well. And so his classes was more to bring out our thoughts rather than remember dates and places. It was, why did they do this? Why did Charlemagne make this move and things like this? It was medieval history, most of it, I believe. And it was interesting from that standpoint, and I enjoyed that part, but we had to do a certain amount of reading and some paperwork as homework, which I never did. The upshot was that I was flunked. That's another thing the modern kids can't understand, that you have to do it over again. Now they've passed, regardless of whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, shove them off in the next grade and get rid of them. But not in those days. If you didn't cut the mustard, you stayed and did it over. Not necessarily with him, but in my case, I got him again. I flunked again. But the irony was that when I came back the next time, I got history, Collins. And I remember walking into the class, he looked at me and says, "No, don't tell me I got you again." But I had learned my lesson. Boy, and I studied. And I passed. And he made some remark at the end of the season. He said, "Well, I'm glad you got your act together. It was enjoyed having you this semester." But anyhow, and another teacher that I remember is Kyber, Mr. Kyber. I don't know his first name. He taught debating and public speaking, and I took that class. It was an elective, but I thought it'd be a good thing for me to have, and it was. Except there again, for a long time, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I don't know whether you've ever had public speaking class or whether they're still the same as they used to be, but we used to have to write rebuttals. The class project for the time that I was there was whether or not the question is whether or not we should build the Welland Canal between the lakes, the Great Lakes, so that ocean shipping could come all the way down to Chicago. All they had to do is put a canal through there in one place, and they could bring these ships through because they had plenty of draft otherwise, you know, through there. The question is whether or not to do it. And so you wrote rebuttals for both sides, for and against, and you had to have so many of these in a week or so, and they usually amounted to two handwritten pages about that long each rebuttal. Some would be longer, depend on how much you needed, but average, a couple pages. And I didn't do mine again. And this went on, and the other kids were turning their stuff in, and in addition to that, of course, we had public speaking to do. We'd go into the auditorium, and we had to memorize a story, and then get up and tell it, and put some drama into the thing, and everything else like that. And I was scared silly the first time I got up there on the stage and did it, but I got used to that, and that part of that segment of my public speaking class was pretty good. But anyhow, he told me one day, he says, if you don't start getting those rebuttals in here, you're not going to pass this class. And so anyhow, I started working on them. I didn't want to do the same thing again as I was doing at Collins. So I went home and I worked, and I put them together, a bunch of these together, and I put them together, and it was a mistake, I guess. I don't know whether it was or not. But anyhow, I took in about 10 at a time, see? And I'd give it to him, and it'd surprise him. And he said, well, fine, I'll read them over and so forth. So anyhow, I did this, and I was practically caught up with the class. And he wasn't complimenting me, really. He was looking down his nose at me. I couldn't figure that out. And so anyhow, finally he says, Victor, tell me, whose work are you copying? And I says, copying? I said, I'm not copying any. I'm sitting home and doing these things. Ask my grandmother. I was living with my grandmother and granddad at that time. I said, ask my grandmother. I'm sitting there every night working on these things. You told me I was going to flunk if I didn't do it, and still he had that kind of worried look, like, I don't know about this guy. And I asked for it. If I was him, I would feel the same way, right? Because all of a sudden I'm getting bushel baskets full of these things in, see? I caught up with the class, and I passed it, but I'll never forget what an awful kick in the teeth it was for me to hear him say, whose work are you copying? When I was really working to do these things. But I got out of it. I only had to go through that once. I had some good friends in high school, and I was in band and I was in orchestra. I had taken a few banjo lessons, but that's all the formal music I had.
Now, why did you take banjo lessons?
Because I wanted to play banjo. I had played ukulele around the neighborhood. We had a bunch of us get together and sing and harmonize at night, you know, and I played the uke. And I liked it, and I liked it very much. And while I was carrying papers there, I had to walk by Pettit's Music Store, which was downtown, on the way to the paper. That's when I was working for the Democrat, and I had to go and pick up my papers, you know. And they had this banjo in the window. And I thought, oh, man, that's what I want. And I went in and asked him how much. It was $40. Excuse me. And so I went home. I didn't have $40. And so I went and asked Mom. And $40 was a fortune for her. I mean, my gosh, we were living on, we were really, well, I've already said that we were poor. We were poor. And $40 wasn't enough. So she says, oh, I can't do it. I haven't got it. And I said, well, and she mentioned the paper route, but I couldn't wait that long. My gosh, the way I was bringing in a couple of bucks a week, it'd be a year off before I'd ever get $40 together. But she we made a deal, and I can't remember what it was. She said if maybe it was if I did better schoolwork or something, I don't know. I was smart enough. It's just that I wouldn't do my work. When I did my work, zoom, I was up with the best of them, you know, but I just wouldn't do it. And so she might have used that as a lever, because she finally said something about, if you do that, I'll see if I can't get enough money together to buy that banjo. Well, I did work then towards that, and took care of whatever she wanted me to do, whether it was classes or whatever. And one day she says, we're going to get your banjo. So we went down there, and also Mr. Pettit owned the store, and he said he'd teach me to play banjo, which he did. He gave me about 4 lessons. He didn't know how to play banjo, but he played violin. So he taught me one finger off of violin sheets, violin music. He taught me to play one finger on like a violin is one note, but no chords, like zing. And so finally I asked him, I said, well, gee, when do I start zing, zing like this? She said, well, I don't teach that. I'll have Al Weiss teach you. So I had about 4 more lessons from Al Weiss, who was a banjo player and played in bands and stuff, which is what I wanted. And anyhow, that was the beginning of my music business. And so anyhow, at high school there,
so you mentioned before that most kids had piano lessons when they're growing up and stuff like that. Did you never have piano lessons?
Mom wanted me to take piano lessons when I was about 11 or 12, and there again, the costs were prohibitive, except I could go up to the Davenport High School on Saturday mornings, and they had a class to take piano, and you had a cardboard keyboard that you kept with you. You took it home, and you practiced at home, and you took it up there, and you sat, and as the teacher was doing things, you would figure it out on this cardboard keyboard. And the lessons were 25 cents a piece per week. But the walk from 2600 West to 4th Street, where I was living at that time, up to the high school was a long, long walk, I'll tell you. And I walked up and walked back. After that hour before and after that, that was a killing deal, and it took a big chunk out of my Saturday, which I had other plans for. And she had an awful time getting me to practice on that. I was as bad at that as I was in school. And so she finally gave up. But later on, after I started getting into music, I really was sorry for that, because I would have loved to play piano. Because that is an instrument in itself. It needs no support. You've got everything there. And particularly after I got into it professionally, in the dance band business, I really felt sorry that I hadn't taken that. I'd have much rather had that than the banjo and the guitar. I went to guitar later. And so anyhow, also, while I was in high school, I was informed that since I was the son of a soldier who had died in war, I told you my dad died of the flu. He didn't fly in, he didn't die because of battle conditions. But nevertheless, I was eligible for West Point. And so that sounded dandy to me. I thought, boy, ha ha ha. So I found out what I had to have to get in there, what the requirements, and it required mathematics beyond what I had. I quit taking mathematics when it became elective. Arithmetic through the 8th grade, that's as far as I went with that. And from the 9th grade on, I had none. I didn't have any algebra, I didn't have any geometry or any of those other things, but that was required. So I went to George Edward Marshall, our principal at the high school, which was one grand guy, and I asked him what I could do. He says, well, that's no problem. We can fix that up. We don't teach algebra here, but they do up at J.B. Young Intermediate, where I had come from. So what we'll do, we'll give you time during the day to walk up there and take that class and then come back. And there you'll catch up with this stuff. So I started out on that, and that was right during the lunch period when my buddies were all having lunch. See? And so did it religiously to begin with. Every 5 days a week I was up there at the school and back. And it started to tire, and those guys said, hey, come on, skip it. Come on over and have lunch with us, you know. And pretty soon I started playing hooky off of that deal. And pretty soon I wasn't going up there at all anymore. I was just going over there, and anyhow, the word got back to the principal that I wasn't attending school up there. And so one time we were going to be playing Clinton, Iowa football. And it was on a Friday afternoon. And if you wanted to go to the game, you had to, I don't know what time of the day it was, but this sounds kind of silly, but it was a Friday, and if we wanted to go, we had to tell our homeroom, I don't know whether it's true now, but in those days, you went into a homeroom in the morning where you were counted and everything else, and then from there you went to the classes. And then you came in, I guess, at night, in the latter part of the day. You came back in there before you were left. Well, okay, I had to inform the teacher, homeroom teacher, that I was going to the game. Well, I didn't do that because I wasn't going to go to the game. I hadn't planned on it. And so I'm in my 6th period physiology class, which I really liked. I liked physiology. And anyhow, there was a big plate glass window in the doorway, you know, and all of a sudden I look up and here's Walt Stevens, an old buddy of mine. He's out there and he's going, come on, like this, you know. No, I'm not going to call him. Come on. So anyhow, after the class broke, he's out in the hall. Come on, we're going to go to the football game. I said, look, I didn't check out. I didn't check my homeroom teacher. I can't do that. He said, the difference to make. So anyhow, I go to the game. And the upshot is, Monday, I come back, and George Edward Marshall, the principal, was not there. He was in Chicago or someplace at a convention. And so I had to do business with Mr. Keller, who was the assistant principal and a ratter, if there ever was one. He loved the girls, but he hated the boys. And I went the homeroom teacher, and the homeroom teacher says, Mr. Keller wants to talk to you in the office. So I knew what it was. I wasn't that dumb. So anyhow, I go in there, and he says, He says, where were you Friday afternoon? I said, I went to the football game, sir. Well, did you check in? I said, no, I didn't. We made up our mind the last minute. I'm sorry I didn't do that. Well, I also see here in your record that you failed to go up to J.B. Young for your algebra classes, and you just dropped out and took that part of the day out. And I says, yeah, that's true. And he says, well, I'll tell you, I'm going to have to expel you for the balance of this semester because you have no responsibility. You don't take school seriously. And the old palaver that you would get. So anyhow, the upshot was I was out of school then for the balance of that semester. And so the beginning of the next semester, I'm hot to trot. So I go back to school, and I go in the office to re-enroll or whatever you have to do, and who's in there but Keller? Yeah, if Marshall was there, I'd had a chance because he was a decent guy, but Keller was there. And he says, no, I don't think you've learned your lesson. you're going to have to take another semester off. Boy, I'll tell you, my mother threw a fit on that one, and I don't blame her. I mean, because I was ready to stick by the rules, you know, and work. I was playing in the band then too at that time, the dance band, just starting, just getting it off the ground, and also I was playing in the school band, where I still don't know where I got the ability, but I was playing French horn, and I was playing C clarinet. What else? Oh, something else. I can't remember. And I never took a lesson. But Kent Gannett, he was a great guy too. He taught English or music appreciation and music and harmony and things like that. And I took harmony from him, and he seemed to think I had some abilities, and so he's the one that said, "Why don't you see if you can play?" I think it was trumpet first, and or no, it was French horn. That's right. It wasn't French horn. It was mellophone, which is the same as the French horn but different kind of keys. The trumpet kind of keys. A French horn has pads that you press on, but otherwise you hold your hand in the bell. You've seen them play round things. They got about 15 feet of tubing on them. And so I played mellophone in the band. And then he needed a C clarinet player, and he says, "Victor, you think you could play C clarinet?" And I said, "I don't know. I'll try." And so I got some scales and so forth, and practice on it was a school instrument, you know. So was the mellophone. And I practiced on that, and so I was playing C clarinets. And then I started playing C clarinet in the band. But what Kent Gannett didn't know, who taught the orchestra, and also a guy by the name of Schmitz, who taught them handle the band, they didn't really realize it, but all I was doing is ad-libbing everything. I wasn't reading a note, because one thing I didn't learn, I learned how to blow and everything else, and I knew where the fingerings is and how to run scales on it, but I still didn't learn how to read the music, you know. And so I just ad-lib. I like the good old marches. There's da-da-da, toodle-doodle-doodle-doodle. I'd dibble away at anything I wanted on there. It's just fine. So you can tell that I was a slacker all the way through my high school period. But and it was part of the fun, I guess. But I suffered in the long run, because it ended up, I did go back to school then about a year and it'll be 2 semesters later. And I finished up, and I did well then, because I was working in the band, and I determined I was going to get a diploma, because even then, why, if you didn't have a diploma, high school diploma, why you'd be shoveling coal the rest of your life. Just like now, if you don't go to college, you're shoveling coal the rest of your life. But I went back to school and finally graduated. I was over 21 and paying tuition before I graduated. I lost that much time. Maybe I even stayed on extra long, because being with the band, it was difficult to work everything in. Because I remember many times we had some distance to go to a one-night shot somewhere. The guys I'd go out when school was out, which was about 3 o'clock or so, and here's the band bus waiting out there for me, with all the guys in it, and then we'd take off. But it was fun, a fun part of my life. I liked it. I had girls, as most guys do, and it was a joyous part of my life. I don't know what else I can tell you.
Well, were you, when you're going to school that late, did you get harassed by the other guys, or did that happen? Or?
No, I didn't get harassed. Nobody harassed me. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, one teacher did. But I'll tell you about that in a minute. But what I did get, they thought I was the old man. See, I was the old man in the class. because they're 16 and 17. I had to do part of my senior year and the part of the junior year and the senior year. That's what I had left to do. And so they were 15, 16, and I'm 21. So you can see why they felt I was an old man. But anyhow, I got along well with them and everything else. They weren't razzing me or anything. Most of them knew what happened. They would ask, and the story would get around. Well, he got kicked out of school for a year or something like that. So anyhow, I was going to tell you about the teacher that did give me some problem. She was Mrs. Finch. It's amazing I can remember these names. They say in old age, it's things right yesterday you can't remember, but the old stuff you can remember. And they're right. That's exactly what it is. Don't ask me what I had to eat last night. I couldn't tell you. But anyhow, she was teaching English literature. And we were studying Byron, I remember, Los Miserables. No, that's Victor Hugo. El Allegro and El Penseroso. Do you remember his two things? And we had to memorize those, among other things. But anyhow, the reason I bring that up is El Allegro particularly, is that we were about to study Allegro. She was introducing that, and she knew that I was a musician because, in fact, everybody knew I was a musician. I was a pretty popular guy around there because I was flying, and I was in musician, see, and older. So I had a lot of advantages. So anyhow, she took a dislike to me. I don't know why. I did my work and everything else, but she needled me. Maybe because I was older, you know. She probably thought I was a renegade, and she's going to show you she wasn't going to have a renegade in her place, you know. So anyhow, the question came up. She asked El Allegro. She says, "Victor, you're a musician. What does El Allegro mean?" And she's been needled me now, making me look like a fool for quite a long time. But I'm determined to get out of school, so I'm putting up with this, see. And I didn't know El Allegro. When you say brightly or something in dance music, you put brightly on there. You don't say Allegro. It's only in the classics that you use the old Latin terms. So I had to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know what it means." And so then she started saying, "Victor, how does that happen?" And she started reading me off in front of the class, And I stood up, and I gave her a retort. And I can't remember what I said. In fact, I don't know whether I remember what I said after I walked out the door, but it flowed out of me, And I grabbed my books and started to walk out, and the kids clapped. Can you believe that? They clapped when I walked out that door. And I went down, Marshall was down there at the time, and he said, "The best thing for you to do is just stay out of the class for the balance of the year, and we'll try and work with another credit in." I had another. Well, I had one other. I had English to do, would be hung over. There'd be one credit hung over that I couldn't get through as a full day thing. So I'd have to come in once a day. He says, "Well, maybe we can put that on so you come in for 2 periods a day." And I said, "That's great." The following semester, which I did. But I got my comeuppance on Mrs. Finch. This was delightful to talk about. After she'd given me this hard time and everything else. Well, one night I had a date, and I was with some friends, and we went to a nightclub over in Rock Island, Illinois. And so who's in there but Mrs. Finch with somebody? And I said, and I walked up, and I said, well, hello, Mrs. Finch. What a surprise to see you here. And I made a few other remarks that I can't remember. I said, geez, what the kids are going to love to hear about this. Boy, that gave me a lot of delight. Because she couldn't get back to me. I was already walked out of her class, you know. So anyhow, that's so much for high school. I don't know whether there's lots of other things I could tell you, I suppose, if I could think of them. But I'd have to dig pretty deep to find any more. Those come off the top of my head.
Well, you mentioned you were in the orchestra, or the school orchestra?
Yeah.
And then you had your own band on the side?
No, I didn't have a band. Emil Flint was a musician. Emil Flint had had bands around the Tri-City areas for quite a few years. And in the meantime, I started with in Rock Island, Illinois, at a roller skating rink, in a little band that my cousin Bill Anthony played piano in, and it consisted of a trombone, trumpet, two brothers, and Roy Winters on drums, the Lear brothers, and Roy Winters on drum and Bill on piano. And so they decided they wanted the banjo, so that's where I started, playing banjo in this roller skating rink. And it's a good thing the roller skating rink made so much noise they couldn't hear we were playing anyhow, so it didn't matter how bad we were. But anyhow, we cut our eye teeth on there. And then later we decided that we wanted to have a band. That was during the summer. The roller skating rink was in a big tent. So then we decided we wanted to keep on playing, and we couldn't get jobs. We didn't know anything about it. But we heard that Emil Flint at the moment didn't have a band. So we called to see if he would audition us. And so we went over there and we auditioned in his garage. And he liked what he heard, I guess, because here he had a nucleus of young band, you know, and we, during the summer, we had learned something about music, you know. Well, thanks a lot.
Should we just leave it?
We just leave it. And so we started with Flint. We added more men, and we started with Emil. When we first started, we had two trumpets. We had a trumpet and trombone, two saxophones, alto and tenor sax, and Roy on drums, and me on banjo, and Bill on piano. And we didn't have a bass. And that was about the size of our band, which was small. But anyhow, we got some nice jobs, and we played at Iowa City fraternities and so forth. We really, and I started writing arrangements. And so we grew from there.
What did Emil Flint do then?
He was a front man. He played violin, but badly, and seldom, thank goodness. But he was a good manager, and he had a big smile. He's a good-looking man. You know, he had all white hair, and when he smiled, the whole place glowed. You know, he had that kind of personality, and he was a nice guy to work with. I think we got jazzed out of some of our funds from time to time, because we didn't know anything about what he got.
Right.
We just know what we got. And sometimes we figured he got paid a lot more than, and we should have gotten paid a lot more. But we didn't rebel, because he was our savior.
Right.
So.
What did that mean to be the front man? You mean he was just the manager?
The leader. Well, he was a manager. He was everything. He ran the show. He booked the band.
He directed you as you played?
Yeah, he was in front. A front man means on the in front, and that's, you know, handling the people, talking to the people, getting he's the window dressing, and we're putting out the music. And also, he did everything. He did the booking, and he furnished the transportation. That's another story, the transportation we had. You haven't got enough tape in that great big box in there for things. If I really get started, I'll tell you. But
give us a tidbit or two.
What?
Give us a tidbit or two. Give me a tidbit or two of what your a story of your transportation.
Oh, transportation? Well, it first started out, we had these automobiles that I'm going to mention, you don't even know them. They're so old. Like Studebaker. You recall the Studebaker?
I've heard,
That
yeah.
there was a Studebaker? Well, they used to make a big car. It was a 7-passenger sedan. So when it first started out, we started out with a 7-passenger sedan Studebaker. And they had running boards on them, on the sides. You know what running boards are?
Yeah.
You step up things to go into the car on both sides. And so we got into the Studebaker on this side, and on this side, on the outside, hung all of our instruments, tied on to the side outside of the car. So we go down the street, there's a great big bulge of instruments all tied like this onto the side of the car. It looked a mess, but anyhow, we got there and got back. Sometimes we ran into a little problem, but anyhow, then he had a brilliant idea. Emil had a lot of brilliant ideas, and he followed through on them, thank goodness. He bought a delivery truck. It was a closed-in truck, you know. And he had a helper, Frank Roller, who was a pretty good mechanic and pretty good with his hands and everything. So they cut off the front, engine compartment, so that the driver's compartment with the windshield right here and the seat where he sits on, and then it went in at the bottom. Just there was no motor, no nothing. But he put a hitch on the front so they could hitch it behind the Studebaker. So it was a trailer. It became a trailer, just that part. So 3 guys could sit in that seat, a little crowded, of course, and all the instruments were in the truck behind, you know, in that part of it. And we pulled that around for a while. we had some close calls. Fran Lear, Emil usually drove, but then Fran Lear wanted to drive. And so Emil broke him in on it. It was tough to drive that thing at night. Those roads were narrow. They were just this way and much narrower. Our cars were narrow too, of course. But the narrow, I don't know what they are, 9 feet, 10 feet across, wide. At that time they were about 6 or 7 feet wide. So boy, you had to watch where you're driving. And they weren't lined. There was no line in the middle. A painted line, divider lane, nothing. You just guessed how far over you were. So it was a tough, mad thing to do. And but anyhow, Frank, Emil taught Fran Lear to drive, and so we're leaving a town. We had played our job in a town up in Illinois. I can't remember the name of the town. But anyhow, in going out of town, you were kind of up on a bluff, and then there was a steep hill down like this, and down below there was a railroad yard. And we'd drive along that railroad yard, and then we would come to a turn, and we'd go down this hill and across the bridge over the railroad yard, see? Well, Fran turned too soon. And he get on this road, and down this hill we go. It's 45 degrees into the railroad yards and over the railroad tracks. threw everything out of the car. Oh, it was a mess. Fortunately, it didn't do too much damage to the car. There must have been some boards or something between those tracks, because otherwise it would have torn that car to pieces, you know. But we managed to get turned around and get back out of there again, alive, in one piece, and get home. But I got a load of stories. I can't tell them all. But
Was he towing that truck?
yes, that truck was behind. Can you imagine what those 3 guys in the back were thinking? And the thing is that you got to remember is in those days, that was before safety glass. This is window pane glass I'm talking about. Boy, if one of those shattered, you're cut to pieces.
Yeah.
Boy, I ought to tell you, we lived a risky life. But anyhow, carry on. Soon our band got larger, and the accommodations were too skimpy. We had more instruments. We got more instruments. Roy Winters, for instance, got a vibraphone and things like that, and so there was no room. So Emil came up with another idea. He got a Studebaker coupe. It was a 4-passenger coupe, I think, with a little jump seat, and it had the back like that, you know, that you lift up in the back. So Emil came up with a fifth-wheeler type of an idea. He would put a thing in the back of the Studebaker like that, and then you'd bring the tongue up and put it in there, and then go down like that, and here was your trailer back there. And it was windows all the way around the thing, and our enough room we could put a card table in with all the seating area up in the front. Then over the wheels were the places where all the band instruments were, and then a narrow lane through that to back, so there was a seat clear across the back. So, excuse me. So there was enough room for all of us. I mean, with the car and everything else, we had plenty of room. And we used to sit there and play cards and that thing with a card table, you know, penny ante, poker, things like that. And I would write arrangements on the way. Keep myself busy. I didn't care much for poker. Well, I liked poker, but it got old when you did it all the time. So I would write arrangements, and I had a kind of a knack that I studied doing it. Originally, when I started arranging, I had to try the piano and check it out, but after a while, I was able to hear all these tunes in my head and know the notes I could put down, you know, God bless America, you know, I'd know the C down to B flat, so on. I knew that in my head. So I could write without a piano. And so I did a lot of that. And then we'd get to a town if we had some time left, which we often did, because we wanted to, back in those days, you had to allow plenty of time because you're going to probably have a tire flat, or you're going to have your car blow up on you or something, which wasn't. Cars were not reliable back in those days. Weren't we talking about, yeah, we were talking yesterday about the difference in things those days and today. Things are much, much more reliable in those days. And I can tell you a lot of breakdown stories too. But anyhow, we'd get to in about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, and we'd find a pool hall. We'd go and play pool till lunch or dinner. And back in those days, you can get a full dinner with dessert for 50 cents. Full dinner, meat, potatoes. I don't know whether there's salad. Salads weren't as popular then as they are now, but possibly salad. And I don't think you got a drink. But you got a meat and potatoes and a vegetable and dessert for 50 cents. Isn't that great? Of course, in those days we were earning good money as compared to most people. We made $7 a night. And we worked practically every night of the week. Seven, that's $49. That's almost $50 for a stinking musician. But we were doing pretty well. Roy Lear was the first one to get married. He was the trumpet player. And your grandmother and I were the second ones in the band to get married. And
so you guys were all pretty much the same age? Everyone in the
oh yeah, we were. We were all about the same age. And
it started. How old were you when you went to Emil Flint?
Emil Flint, let's see, I'd say, I think we went with him in 29. I was 17. Yeah. And I stayed in the band business and with Emil the whole time until 1936, when I quit the band and started looking for a photo job, of which there weren't any. but that's another story.
So from the time you were 17 to about the time you were 24, you
Yeah.
were just in the band.
I was in the band, yeah. And the last 4 years, in 1934, 2 years before I quit the band, I decided that I wanted to leave the band and get into something else for a couple of reasons. First of all, I was now married, and we had Joanne was born, and we lived in a stinky little one-room apartment with a roll-down bed, and things like that. And I hated that because back in Davenport, where I come from, we lived in big houses. Not big, but houses, where you had 6, 7 rooms. And here we are in this little thing, and looking out on the vacant lot next door was looking out on a lot of trash and everything. This was in Berwyn, Illinois. It's kind of a junky town, anyhow. And at least half of the guys lived in that same apartment building. The rest of them were dispersed between there, and some of the guys lived up in Oak Park, which was the next town north. And we moved from there, and we moved up to into Oak Park on Madison Avenue, and got a larger apartment over a Manny Moe and Jack automobile parts place. And all the noisiest place anybody could ever want to live, because it was right on Madison Avenue, and this was before freeways, many years before freeways, when all of the traffic from west, from Iowa, from Oklahoma and everybody else coming into Chicago comes in Madison Avenue. That along with the streetcars, all the trucks, I mean. So you hear these trucks, you hear streetcars, and when we first moved into that place, we didn't notice it so much in the daytime, but the first night we were there, boy, this noise out on the streets, going all the time, horns honking and everything. And down below, we got this Pep Boys or whatever it was. That's Manny Moe and Jack, isn't it?
I think, yeah.
Something. And right in that was the day that the air horns first came out. You ever know what air horn is? Yeah. Boy, they make a racket. And so everybody come in the store, tested the one that was on the counter. And boy, you'd jump upstairs every time it went off at first. But the strange thing is, we weren't in there a week and we didn't hear anything anymore. We just got so used to it, in one ear and out the other. It's amazing. It was the only salvation we had, otherwise it had driven us up the wall. And we were living there when Joanne was born. And there was another story. I was interested in photography, as I told you, and so I was shooting pictures and I was developing them myself in the bathroom. And then I wanted to start printing them. I had no way to print them, but I finally got some of the stuff to print them, and I could print in a darkened room. And I just print little pictures like this. And but I didn't have any way to dry them. And I also all of a sudden got an idea how I could get a glossy print. I would squeegee them on the mirrors and on the windows, But that didn't work. They wouldn't come off. So this is while Helen is in the hospital having Joanne, the 10 days they had to be in the hospital. Oh, yeah. So I'm going at home at night, I'm doing this. See, I was printing at first, but she didn't know anything. Well, she didn't see it. She knew what was going on, I was telling her. But it ended up, I spent about 3 or 4 nights with a razor blade scraping all those things off the window because they just glued on, You learn a lot the hard way, believe me. I do, anyhow. Yeah. But anyhow, what else can I tell you?
Well, let's go back because we were getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit.
Yeah, we are, aren't we?
Well, yeah. Go back in high school. Obviously, you had a kind of a strange high school experience in that you must have been in high school for a lot of years, and you were in high school for a couple of years.
Well,
and then you were out.
I was out.
I don't know, however long, and then when you went back, I suppose you didn't go back full time.
Yeah, I did. I went back full time because see, we went to school with start at 8:30, and by 3 o'clock we're out. So almost invariably, or almost always, the place we had to play that night was close enough that we could leave after 3 o'clock and get there. Because from 3 o'clock till 9 gives you a pretty good spread of time. You know, that's 6 hours. Because we usually start at 9. So, yeah, I went to full time. The only extra time I put in school was that extra 2 periods I took at the end, where I had to go in just for the 2 periods. But other than that, I served the normal 3-year deal with just a chunk chalked out and put over here, see.
Right.
So,
Tell us about the your first few experiences, and maybe you could even go back before high school. I mean, maybe your first kiss was before high school.
yeah, I think it was. Come to think about it.
Don't brag about it.
But anyhow, I was sweet. I was real in J.B. Young Intermediate School. I was really sweet on a gal that lived in homeroom, just 2 seats over from me, by the name of Alice Wittig. And she was a cute little doll, I'll tell you that. And I don't know whether she was as enamored with me as I was with her. However, we passed notes back and forth and so forth, and walked together in the hallway and things like that. And that went on for a while, but we were a little too young to date yet in those days, you know. So our high school experiences together was the only thing we had. But the reason I bring her up is that she later became my cousin-in-law. She was down at the Coliseum one night dancing. She came down there regularly. And I'd wave at her, you know, and she'd wave at me. And when we were playing at the Coliseum, we played there often. It was the biggest ballroom in the Tri-Cities, and it was a great place. Wonderful place to sit. We played in a great big shell, if you know what I mean. Looked like a shell. And they had the big bands down there. We were really getting into pretty big time when they played there. And we had it as a steady place. We'd play in there probably. They were open about 3 nights a week, and at least one of those we'd be there. And Alice would be there. And Walt Anthony, my cousin, Bill and Walt Anthony. Bill was a piano player. Remember, I mentioned him. And in the meantime, we were picking up more musicians, and Walt Anthony had been learning trumpet and had become pretty good at it. So Walt got a job on the band as a second trumpet. So he was working on the band, and one night he noticed that gal waving at me. He said, "Geez, boy, you really know the dolls, don't you? She's pretty cute." And I says, "You want to meet her?" Yeah. I said, "What's it worth to you?" And I ribbed him like, say, "Well, $5, you know." Finally, I thought, forget it. I'll introduce you to her. So anyhow, I called her up there to the bandstand, and I said, "One of our guys wants to meet you." And I told Walt to come out. Walt shook hands and said hi and so forth. And later on at intermission, I guess he made arrangements to meet her at intermission. So anyhow, at intermission, they got a little closer together, you know, and got to know each other and made a date, things like that. They ended up, they married. And they've been out here, they spent a pretty good portion of their life while they were raising their family here in Phoenix. They had to come out here because one of the kids had asthma or something like that, some lung disorder. So go to Phoenix. That was the thing in the old days, because Phoenix was supposed to represent clear air. So they came here. And Walt had a band, one of the good bands in Phoenix for quite a long time here, in addition to selling ads for the Republic newspaper. And later on he went over to California. A guy that he knew, a real good friend that he knew here, went over and went to work for Hughes Aircraft. And after he got over there, he found a job was open that he thought he could get Walt in there, and he did get Walt in there, and it was a good job, a real good job. I mean, it was an executive position. It developed into an executive position. Of course, Walt had a lot of talent, and he had a great personality. So it didn't surprise me that he went up the ladder pretty well down there, over there. And he retired from there, and he had to have a lung taken out. He was a heavy smoker, and then of course he quit. But anyhow, then they moved back over here after they retired. They moved back over here again, and Alice just died this year. She just passed away.
Wow.
She had a lot of ailments, and is a good gal. Walt's still here.
Really?
Yeah, I see him once in a while. I go out there and see him. He's very, very hard of hearing. I think I'm bad, but he's pretty bad. But anyhow, what we get off of? Might be the same way with Walt.
Yeah. Well, I just let him know that. Just tell him, I'll just ask you a general question.
Key question.
And just talk everything you know about.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
All right, good.
And then he'll just be talking.
I think he'd like that. I think he'd like that.
Well, that'd be great.
Yeah, he's a nice guy.
Well,
So,
getting back to, you're talking about girls, and Alice was the first girl
oh yeah.
you were
Yeah.
kind of enamored with.
Well, I don't know that she was the first. You bring up some crazy things, you know that? The first girl I was enamored with was a girl who lived across the street from my grandmother and granddad up on 13th Street. Her name was Emma. And she was not particularly good-looking girl, and she was a little heavy. But she was the first girl that I really looked at as a girl. You know, maybe the first time, you know how boys are, the girl, yeah, until they get to a certain age, and you know, it all changes all of a sudden. And she came along, she was there at the time that I went to the stage, see? And so I remember I took her, oh brother, I took her to a theater one Sunday afternoon. I told her I'd take her to a show. Asked her whether she'd go to a show, and she did. So we went downtown, walked downtown. Don't ask me where I got the money, but I had it. I guess I was working for Gramp. And we went down the show, and I remember I wanted to put my arm around her, you know, and I'm sneaky, going like this, you know. And finally I get the thing up around her, you know. Oh gosh, this is great. And then my arm starts going to sleep. And I don't know whether I should take it off. How can I get the thing down? You know, you're so careful, you know, when you're out with a girl for the first time to do everything right, you know. And so I hear this thing driving me crazy. So finally I just gusto, I pull the thing back. Anyhow, then we walked home, and I kissed her in the shed out back of their house.
And how did you end up in the shed?
Like, because we didn't want all the neighbors to see us. And the shed was convenient. And so anyhow, I went over and played some games with her and her family, father, mother too, over there at her house. But that didn't last too long. That was just my first puppy love experience.
How old were you?
Oh, I don't know, 15, something like that.
Generally, guys are kind of fall in two categories: the ones that like to go out with a lot of girls and don't settle in on one,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other type, which is usually ones that always have a girlfriend, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
They have
never
a
had.
girlfriend for a long time, and then they break up, and then they find someone particular else.
Yeah.
They're more the girlfriend type instead of the lots of girls type.
I know. Yeah.
What were you, and how?
Well, I couldn't date too much because I was in a band. You know, well, no, wait, at 15 I wasn't in the band. But by the time I'm 17, I'm engrossed in band and music, and I was in aviation. I'll tell you, girls were a little late getting to me because I was too busy with other things, music and flying and stuff like that, and I loved their attention because, like I say, I was something of a little notorious around the school, but I didn't have a lot of time for them. And I double dated when I did. We went to dances and things. But usually when the dances are on, I'm playing. They're all the popular Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights when the dances were on, I'm playing. So it's difficult to have a date. So I didn't probably have as many dates as most kids did.
Would you have a girlfriend that, you know, or did they even do that back? Did people
they had girls
settle in on
one
person
yeah,
when they
sure.
were teenagers and just
Sure.
date one person kind of thing?
Well, when in my later teenagers, let's see, when I was 18 or so, and 19, during that time, yes, I had a steady girlfriend. Frances Dirth, and we got along great. She came from a very poor family that lived up along the river somewhere, Mississippi River, north of town. And she was the housekeeper for a family of Johnsons. He was an optimist, not an optimist, optometrist. Had a business downtown. And that was right next door to my Aunt Anna Boston's house over on Denison Avenue. And the reason I mention that is that we couldn't have the lights on in the house and smooch with the shades up because I was afraid Aunt Anna might see what was going on over there. So we had to be careful about that. But anyhow,
You didn't want it to get back to the family that you had a girlfriend?
Oh, no.
Or was kissing just a little taboo?
Well, yeah. And we'd dance and so forth and so forth. And,
What's so forth?
well, never mind. But anyhow, we went to a lot of dances on the nights we did head off because Frances was a great dancer. She was really great. And we had a lot of fun. You know, I'm so sorry for the way we ended our romance. While I was going with her, I started playing in Springfield, Illinois. And when we'd go down there, we'd go down there for months at a time, and she'd be home. And so when I'd come home, boy, it was a big event, you know, and everything else. And so anyhow, one time while we're down there in Springfield, I fall for your grandmother. She came around to the dances, and one thing I remember is she had a little tam type hat with a white ball on top of it, and she always wore it. See, so I could always see where she was around the hall. See, so I got talking to her, and we started going together, and that was a crazy romance too, because I worked at night down there. We worked every night except Monday night. So she would wait till the band was over and the dance was over, and then I'd take her home. She lived not too far from downtown when we were playing downtown. I'm going to have to stop pretty soon and get a little drink of water. But let me finish this. I really fell for your grandmother. Really fell for her. And in fact, we got to a point where we were talking about getting married. And geez, one thing leads to another. Now I got to tell you about her father. He was one of the grandest men I ever knew. Really great. He had a good smile on his face, a great sense of humor. He had all kinds of trials and tribulations in that family. Three deaths. They had 7 children. 3 of them died. A long smallpox or diphtheria thing where he was kept out of the house. He couldn't get in. And he'd just come and talk to them. And for months this went on, from one kid to the other. And they quarantined the house. Nobody could get in. And he finally retired while we were in San Diego in 1936. After I left the band, we went to San Diego. We'll get into that a little later. But anyhow, while we were out there, he had bought his first car. He had never had a car. He rode the bicycle back and forth to work. He was a mailman. And so after we left, he bought himself a car and learned how to drive. And one day he was driving the thing and he got on the railroad tracks, and for some reason or other, the car died. And he would have had plenty of time to get out of that car, because, and people kept yelling at him, get out. But he wanted, it's his car. He didn't want it to get smashed. So he tried to get it to go, and he waited too long, and he got killed. And that was a real tragedy, because Mom had lost her husband. He had died, which would have been a stepfather of mine. And so she was available, and we always thought what a great deal it would be if those two got together. And they would have. They would have made a great pair, because Mom was a great woman, had a great sense of humor. They would have had a wonderful life together, but he died. He got killed. But that's off the beaten path. Now let's get back to the romance with your grandmother. That's funny to call her a romance with your grandmother. She was Helen. She was a good-looking gal. She was young and sexy, and she had everything.
Well, you were gonna say how it broke off with Francis.
Oh yes, I know, but I want to impress you with the fact that I'm smitten now with your mother. So Fran knows I'm coming home. So what does she do? She makes a great big roast and everything else, and big dinner for me.
And how old were you at this time?
20 or 21.
And you'd been going with Francis for...
Yeah, I'd been going with her for a couple of years or more.
So you were the girlfriend type then?
Yeah,
more so.
Yeah, later on.
I guess
not so much in high school, but later on. And so anyhow, I come up to knock on the door, and here she's standing there. Boy, she looks like an angel. She's dressed in some slinky-looking thing, and ready to grab me, you know. And I say, wait, I got to tell you something. And so I told her about Helen. And boy, I'll tell you, her face dropped down. I still see that. I could almost cry when I recount that moment. And then to make matters worse, she tried to revive it, because while I was home there, I was living on 13th Street, and she would come over there to see me. And she'd walk. And that was a pretty good walk, about 1.5 miles. Mom loved her. They got along great. And so anyhow, I saw her coming, I was out the back door. So she came over. Every time she came over, she'd have to see Mom. And Mom felt so sorry for her. And she said, what a horrible guy you are. But I couldn't face her anymore. It was so traumatic to leave her. I didn't want to have to leave her again and again, you know. And so that poor gal, I felt sorry for her ever since. One of the bad things in my life that I did. But how could I do otherwise? My heart switched. And that was the result.